Unwitting Conspirators. The artist. Say what you like about what you see, but for me, visuals are everything. Their innards are the bread and butter between the beginnings and ends of any of our given equations. They're what we remember when we look back on things. The memories that haunt us, excite us, the futures that inspire hope within us, or fear, depending on where we look. I think the real problem most of the time is we often neglect to pay adequate attention to the ideas and ideologies that deserve the most, and so we never fully attain relationship to them, or they us. So often we silly beings are so hung up on the details least likely to provide us the answers we demand to questions we aren't willing to fully form for ourselves. Seems eternally sloppy to me. We'd much rather be told something similar enough to what we might believe, that we can gather behind it and chant its messages together. Some would say there's power in numbers. And in most cases, I'd have to agree. The ideas we revolve around are no different. It's when they become pictures and moving slideshows in our mind that they become powerful. The ones that stick can help us to live against all odds, or lead us to our deaths. They're the meat and potatoes to our existence if you think of it. They're the way we share things and commune with one another. We paint them with dance, love, hate, words, and over time we become colorful palettes that form with experience. Some of our shades reach deep enough into us, they form roots. But I'm getting away from the point of this entire thing. The point is, art is anything that moves us. It's formed in the spaces beneath our eyes and inside our spirit's mind. And it's only when we see through its eye that we have finally unlocked the tool that can define realities. It can take us from the crosshairs death tosses our way, just to scare us away from living at the very acknowledgement of his looming presence and unknown origins. This place lives in each of us and can be taught to see the real thoughts through the fakes delivered to confuse or punish us for things our insides or outer environments won't let be forgiven to pass away from the lenses we see from. So we start to see them in everything. The long winters, the cold nights, the lonely deserts that form inside and tend to bleed into our way of being. In each of these situations lies a glimmer of hope for the summer to come, the morning that's sure to follow the night, the opportunity to see what you're made of through the desert terrain. But you have to get through the opportunity to despair into the length of time it takes to pass through the darkness and into the light. Devoid of patience, the seed of doubt is bound to swallow one into a death worse than death itself. It's best to avoid this void at all costs, I've found. When an idea comes to an already formed mind, it can't stick if it doesn't fit into the bigger picture that's been painted throughout the holder's life. And this is why I paint. To reflect what I see and beg for better through blended scenes of my own in response to what the muse shows me. Over time and practice, I've found the colors and lines we use to define our own outlines can only sink as deep into the spectrum as we're willing to dig for them. For instance, I didn't know the power of red until I saw my first blood-red sunset over the red desert sand, or in a fish reflecting beneath a crystal-clear surface, the same depth of blue flashing through its scales and bleeding into the passionate red that mingled seamlessly to the tip of its royal fanned tail. It was mesmerizing. As thought-provoking as the subtle tint in the redwoods being highlighted in the proper light. As you can see, there's power in what we see, and the effect it can have on us, or through us. A well-tuned eye understands the right lighting can tint anything into the proper shade at its right time. And then there's the poetry of timing, how any situation can be ironic or tragic depending on what view it's seen from. As a law, you get too close to the source of paint, and you're likely to get splattered in the waves created by it. And it isn't until you see the lack of it and the repercussions therein that you realize life and art are made of the same components. Anything organic has capacity toward it. Anything breathing has nothing but potential energy at their disposal through it. So they call me an artist now, an expert at capturing all these qualities in a single scene of color splashed over what started as an empty canvas. But I see myself doing my best to replicate what my inner artist has shown me. Through trial by fire, I've learned the pictures that first haunt me are often the ones I meant never to materialize. Instead, my focus has been more on the counter-image that manifests when I beg my muse for mercy against the horrific truths taking over my inner tapestry. It changes each time I go inside to view it, so I never try to pinpoint it, simply observe it. And the closer I look, the more I begin to see my immediate surroundings bleeding into the visions taking form. I guess it all started when I was 9 years old. At this point in my life, I was one of a pair, and my muse, my twin. She was the apple of my eye, my best friend and worst enemy, my greatest competition, all wrapped into one brilliant little package. Melody was my better half. She was what we would call a prodigy. She could play any instrument with her eyes closed, and if you showed her a dance, she could take it in circles around you. And in case you weren't impressed still, she'd repeat it again, only backwards, to prove just how well she understood the expression you were going for. She rode English side saddle competitively, and by 8 had already mastered Latin, English, and French. While I'd barely stumbled my way through a year of Germanian language, only to establish an appreciation for the lack of skill it seemed to require me to understand the basics of my native language. Even though it had been me who wanted to ride, dance, and play to begin with, it was always Melody who'd swoop in with the gift of doing it gracefully. I did my best to be happy for her accomplishments, and I was, but the first rule of art is honest expression, no matter the shade it's painted in, so I felt like a shadow, hopping in the wake of my mere image's accomplishments, basking in her afterglow. People misplaced my name for hers constantly. And through it all, the worst part was, Melody was always grateful and kind toward me. The only one who seemed to see me as I was, and for who I was. "I'm just good at the physical stuff, Madeline. You're good at everything else." She always assured me that the best things come last. I was simply being saved for something bigger than her current physical achievements. She told me I saw things differently, and she lived for the bedtime stories I told us both before we'd nod off into sleep. and for a while I believed her. So I spent my days secretly lost in daydreams while I followed her from event to event, just waiting for the time that her time would be my time again. Her attention poured into the stories that I'd concocted throughout the day. The time she hopped up and down in bed with excitement at the narratives I'd depicted made all the loneliness and inadequacies that built over the day worth it to me. In the end, she understood me the way that only someone who grows in the womb with you can. Melody was my other half period. I found my talent when I was 8. It started in crayons, and then when my mother had seen a spark where there hadn't been one, she seized it. It began by sending me to art classes outside of my curriculum. And since it was the first time I'd ever seen an attention toward me being formed, I became hungry. Hungry for the praise from my mother when I captured the light in a unique way through my brush strokes. Hunger for the moments I was able to make my father laugh with the cartoon depictions of something he talked about dealing with politics or economics. The moments he'd tell me he saw a bright future for me. My sister egged me on also, asking me to draw pictures of the faraway places I would tell her about each night. She was convinced that I saw them more beautifully than she could, and that meant something to me. Not long after, the praise for my developing trade faded, leaving me starved. I found myself beginning to pay attention to spectrums outside of social awareness, to more natural schemes others seemed to breeze through, as if they were nothing. It was these that grabbed me up and sent me soaring, flying above the sadness and latent potential, to see the whole picture, and my was it a brighter view. One night, on the cusp of our 10th birthday, I awoke to the thought, those who burn bright fade fast. Hold on while you can. The words haunted my visions leading to the anniversary of our 10th year together. I remember watching my beautiful reflection riding perfectly over a dirt arena. The majestic horse galloping with a practiced air, so aware of her presence atop him. They were perfectly in tune. I remember sitting on top of the metal fence line, watching her leap over barriers without fault, landing just as they'd begun, the picture of perfection, together forming a single unit of movement. I was lulled into the motion, and had been lost in my thoughts, until the figment of my imagination fragmented the scene with one much less beautiful. I imagined a beautiful white butterfly with a hint of rusty brown and freckles along the outline of its wings, hopefully fluttering over the day breeze. I watched it flitter through my mind as my twin made her last round around the dirt ring with Leo the King. To understand the weight of what I'm about to tell you, you have to understand that Melody never missed a jump. She and the horse were one. Since we'd stepped foot into the arena, I'd never seen her unsaddled, so it didn't even seem like a possibility at the time. As I sat there watching the butterfly make its journey over a two-sided highway, a semi-truck suddenly barreled into view, disrupting the beauty with its massive presence. I saw it before I heard it, and like nothing it hit the little butterfly, turning it into a hood ornament. The suddenness of how things had shifted in my imagination unnerved me. The vivid defabrication of the organic being I'd just invested the last 5 minutes to was unsettling, and seeing its spirit plastered to a hot metal grate in a matter of seconds had taken the wind from me. The journey it had begun suddenly transformed into a cautionary tale. By itself, would have been startling, but moments later I heard a disgruntled whinnying from Leo as he tossed his front legs into the air, tying the two pictures together for me. I sat up in my seat at the top of the barrier I was daydreaming from. A scream formed in my throat, but it never echoed into the building around us. Instead, a searing pain ate up my shoulder. I watched my better half lifting into the air as the horse's hind quarters launched her. It was the first broken bone we'd ever had. But it was still the picture of the butterfly that had followed me into sleep that night as I cuddled in as close to Melody as I could, trying to imagine the pain she must be feeling if I could feel it aching in my own arm. I woke to a distant honking of a Mack truck the following morning, and over the next week I'd felt compelled to draw, sketch, and paint the image of the butterfly onto paper. I defied it each time, thinking of the quick response between events that had played in my imagination just before the incident with my twin. Anytime I let my guard down, the image would sink in. Like a lead sinking its hooks into my mouth, I would find myself mindlessly scribbling the picture into existence. Weeks later, my parents had sent us to play in the yard while interviewing tutors for the year to come. I still wasn't speaking to Melody. I refused. Our 10th birthday had passed in the usual method, but this time, after a taste of their attention, it had burned me especially. My parents had invested in new skates, new saddles, new tights, new guitar strings, and things Melody had special use for, while labeling them for both of us. They were thoughtful enough to toss thoughtless gift cards and untouchable money toward a trust I wouldn't see for another 8 years in my direction, specifically. But I'd watched in scathing silence as she'd unwrapped gift after gift with glee, leaving me to pretend happiness toward their care in her cultivation, an utter lack of interest in the skill I was beginning to develop. I'd snuck away and spent the remainder of the evening in my room drawing things I'd normally kept to myself, the scenes I'd refused to depict, because of the implications they'd manifested with. I'd angrily drawn the butterfly trying to cross the road, unaware of the future awaiting its bold decision to follow curiosity. At that time, I thought the butterfly was myself. In no time, I'd taken a picture of mostly grays, browns, greens, and blues, and turned it into red, grays, silvers, and burgundies. An explosion much bigger than the butterfly itself was suddenly spread over the open space of each page as I followed the angry inspiration. I thought of all the attention my other half had been receiving and the little that I'd gotten. She would never know what it was like to be me. And in that moment, on our 10th anniversary of existence together, while she was down celebrating with family and friends foreign to me, I was upstairs in our playroom, my absence unnoticed, just to prove the point. And for a split second, while sketching out the butterfly's final moments, I wondered what it might be like to just be me. No one else, unattached to the constant presence dwarfing my own existence. I'd fallen asleep with the pencil still in my hand. Needless to say, they'd gone with the French master's student for our tutor for the coming year, again proving in my poor little mind where their investments lay. I'd barely slept that night, feeling the weight and guilt of how angry I'd felt with Melody. It wasn't her fault our parents loved her more, but somehow it felt good to punish her. The look on her face showed me she understood what I did just a little more each day I gave her the silent treatment. The following morning, I hadn't felt well. I slept in and brushed my sister away when she'd come to ask me to accompany her to her lessons for the day. If I would have known it would be the last time I'd see her alive, I might have at least uncovered my head and hugged her as tight as a 10-year-old can. But I hadn't, so I didn't. When the phone rang a few hours later, I might have slept right through it had my mother not broken into a fit of screams. I jumped from the bed, full of horror, so fast as the phone had clattered to the floor. The sound of it crashing onto the wooden frame of the house was lost in the blood-curdling cries of a mother experiencing what only a mother can. The whole way down the stairs, I'd imagined the butterfly being crushed and engraved into the grill of a Mack truck. And I hadn't been far off. To my disbelief, my sister had been hit by a FedEx truck, the driver high on pills, as it turns out. I never mentioned the butterfly to my mother. I couldn't bear the thought of her pinning her anguish to me. It was bad enough to know that she secretly wished I'd been the one to go. To this day, she still doesn't know the power my colored pencils held for me from that day forward. I kept it secret and to myself. I've buried this tale beneath years of lessons, practicing and honing in on the light shades, trying to craft the skill set to capture movement in a single frame. Determined that if I was to write into being people's final moments, I might as well depict them with honor, beauty, and a sense of sober care for their details. I tend to coat the darker shades in those that hold promise, letting the ugly fade into the light schemes I can surround them in. Lately, the flashes of inspiration brewing beneath my pretty narratives have been explosive, and for the first time since the butterfly that killed my twin, I can't find the silver lining. Thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for the Mogul, the Detective, and the Judas. Those should all be available within the next few weeks. All right, thanks so much. Until next time, good night, sleep tight, and don't let the bedbugs bite.